Hey guys,
Russ.
welcome to the podcast.
Pat.
Thanks for having me.
Pat McGuire, video game enthusiast, attorney at law.
Enthusiast. Absolutely.
Well, hold on.
What's the credential that gets you the enthusiast title, Terry? What would it take?
To get Pat the
No,
enthusiast
just
title or me?
when talking about people who get the enthusiast title, how much do they have to do to make it to enthusiast?
A non-trivial amount of your free time has to be devoted to this thing.
What if he can literally tell you what a video game tastes like?
Then I'd say we're in enthusiast territory.
Pat, why do you know what video games taste like?
Just earlier today, I was switching out Switch cartridges and put one in my mouth and had remembered right at that moment that they paint them with a chemical that makes them taste awful so children won't eat them. And I've had an awful taste lingering in my mouth subsequent to that. So
it's referred to as a bitterant or bittering agent. But this leads to a more important question about Terry's level of enthusiastism for video games. Terry, I'm almost afraid to ask this. Pat, can you bear with me? And Terry, do you know what a Switch is?
I do. I got my daughter one for Christmas 3 years ago.
Was that challenging?
Yeah, I it wasn't, because I'm a big believer in exposing children to a lot of different things, and it's not like I was giving her that and sending her away to a different place to just exist with the Switch. So I went her. She turns out she didn't care for it. She couldn't stand it. She's a lot like me in that respect. So
you seem proud of that.
Well, I wasn't disappointed.
She's a teenager, or she was like a middle schooler at the time, maybe?
Yeah, I think she was 10 or 11.
Was this her first foray into this stuff and she didn't like it? Or had she kind of like played before and then tried to go Switch and just didn't stick?
Yeah, she's a lot like me in that respect. It's just not her thing.
Could you name another video game device?
A Game Boy?
Right.
Could you name one that's Pat? There's no Game Boy for sale right now, right?
No, but
could you name Terry? Could you name what year the Game Boy was first invented? Pat, don't answer.
Think about that.
Before 2010.
That is a correct but useless answer. Congratulations. Pat, I have a question for you though. Okay. We're getting like the general sense of where we stand here. Right. Pat, can you name any video game characters' last names?
I mean, yes I can. Man, it's tough to do it on the spot. So
you don't have to.
Yes. So I would say yes. Yes, I can.
Terry, do you trust him on that, or are we going to hold his feet to the fire?
In the court of law, I'm not sure that answer stands.
Okay, what's Mario's last name?
Mario does not have a last name. Mario is based off the gentleman who was the property manager for Nintendo America at a warehouse in Seattle where they were crashing and doing things, and he had a big mustache, and so Mario is based off of him.
So this is worth it. That's what I showed up for tonight. Thank you, Pat.
Terry, what country is Mario from?
I'm gonna say Italy, but sounds like U.S.
Where was Mario developed? Country.
U.S.
That is not the correct answer.
Okay. Well, I just heard Seattle, and I'm trusting the attorney.
That's Nintendo America. So they had all these games. So Nintendo is a company that was formed in the I believe the 1700s as a playing card company that would make hand-painted playing cards for the Japanese public. And so it continued onwards, and at some point in the 1980s, decided they were going to get into the family company, they were going to get into video games. They were going to try this new thing, consumer electronics. There was arcades and things like that. And at this time, arcades were the big thing, right? So you go in Japan, there's all these arcades. And so their big one was a license of Donkey Kong, which is what Mario was in before he was in Mario Brothers. He was Jump Man in Donkey Kong. Terry, have you heard of Donkey Kong?
I
That was
have.
literally on my list. I was gonna ask.
I have. Now hold on.
Terry, can you describe what happens in Donkey Kong? Any Donkey Kong anything?
I feel like this segment's taken a turn from Pat being a video game enthusiast to the grilling of Terry about his lack of video game knowledge.
No, I'm curious. I'm curious.
Russ,
here.
I can handle it. I'll take it.
Russ, would you call yourself an enthusiast in grilling Terry on things that
yes.
I want to. I want to know two things. I want to know: is Donkey Kong the threshold of it's too far? Knowing Donkey Kong, you got it. And can you tell me anything about Donkey Kong?
So I'm gonna not answer that question yet, and maybe not at all. I had a brief
fair. That's fair.
I had a brief stint with video games, high school. So I would say I had a close friend in high school that I would stay the night with him. He had a Nintendo. That was the big game of the day. And he had two games. He had Tecmo Bowl, which was a blast. And he had Mike Tyson's Punch Out, which was also a blast. So I want to ask Pat, in the totem pole of video game enthusiasm, do you go back to those days? Because I'm assuming we're around the same age, in the vicinity of the same age. Do you
You're both
go back
in your late 20s? You're very late 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So Mike Tyson's Punch Out in Japan. It was Mr. Sandman was the boss who Mike Tyson took over. Mario is the referee. If you look in the crowd, there's a certain person who you can look at who makes like an O face during your fight with Mike Tyson. That'll tell you when to dodge all of his punches. Okay. All the other characters in Mike Tyson's Punch Out would be horrifically racist by today's standards.
Oh yeah.
Wildly redone. But no, I love Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I love. So I started.
Wait, hold on, Pat. I have a racism question.
No, I don't.
What racial stereotype is Glass Joe?
I don't think he is necessarily
Irish,
but there's
he's Irish.
Yeah, Terry's spent more time with Glass Joe than us.
Yeah. All right. So I started in video games on the Apple II. My dad had an Apple II, and it had a sort of like a rip-off of like Space Invaders called Bug Attack, and you had to put the big floppy disks in to play that. So played that. Then we got a Nintendo Entertainment System, and played Nintendo, Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, probably Mike Tyson's Punch Out, all the basic Nintendo games. Got a Super Nintendo subsequent to that. Basically, I got all the systems. We were allowed to get the system 1 year after it had come out, right? So it came out the first year. We did not get it. And then the next year at the price cut or whatever, then you'd get it. So we got Super Nintendo. And then I went from Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64. From Nintendo 64 to Xbox, actually. Xbox 360. To PlayStation, then Xbox 360. PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. Okay, so those are probably, and then a Nintendo Switch is in there somewhere.
And some random handhelds and Game Boys in there as well.
Random Game Boys. And my mom threw away the link cable that would allow the Game Boys to talk to each other because my brother and I would fight too much.
So hasn't the technology evolved now basically where you can just jump through a portal in your bathroom mirror and just you're in the game? I mean, you're participating.
Only in the game portal.
Only in the game portal.
But so what's interesting about video games, especially nostalgia of video games, is like whatever the highest level of graphics at the time, our mind sort of filled in everything else, right? Like we didn't look at Mario and say, oh, this doesn't look good. This doesn't look like a plumber. We basically were spending the whole time going like, oh my gosh, wow, the guy's jumping around. The concept that you could control somebody in the game, your mind would fill in most of the differences. I would say for video games, for me, there's just a need to do something that feels, and this will sound funny, vaguely productive in a completely not at all productive, if you think about it, way, right? Like it's the concept of achievements and leveling up and doing those sorts of things. That's kind of what gets me. I have a real need to sort of play things, experience things, and then hopefully complete things, right? And then once it's completed, I then often don't go back to them, except in the early days when you had like one video game that you owned for the year, you obviously played that game like 1,000 times.
I had you pegged when we talked the first time. I had you pegged more of a chess guy.
Chess is a game. I had chess on the Nintendo Entertainment System as well, so
Gotcha.
I like chess. The same thing. It's there are. I mean, Russ, we can bring you in here, but there are a lot of games with sort of logical structures, a lot of logical figuring out how things work together. I find myself really involved in games that involve like a level of strategy of figuring out like, okay, I'm going to try many ways to make this happen. And I'm most interested not in necessarily just getting past the problem or getting past the level, but creating the perfect solution to the problem.
Terry, of the systems that Pat named that he had owned, what percentage of those were you aware existed?
All of them, and
Good.
Microsoft owns them all, I think.
That's completely inaccurate. So you're close though. Terry, when was the last time you touched a video game?
Oh, geez. Years.
You don't know.
A lot of years.
Pat, when was the last time you touched a video game?
I put one in my mouth. 30.
I'm at less than 60 minutes since I last played a video game. Yeah, and I probably have an unbroken streak of, several weeks having played a game.
Terry, can I ask you a question?
For sure.
If you had to rank these three industries by the amount of money that just brought in, like gross domestic product for these three industries, and the industries were books, video games, and movies, the movie industry, how would you rank those three?
Books last for sure.
Okay.
And I'd say if you'd asked me this 20 years ago, movies by far probably number one. I would bet that video games have surpassed. And a matter of fact, I think I read an article not that long ago about how movie studios are basically, the movie is second, is basically cast off for the main product. They're more interested in making video games. So I don't know if that's the answer, but I'm going to go video games, movies, and books.
Do you want to take a stab at the orders of magnitude here, Terry?
Dwarfs. My hunch is that it dwarfs. There are a whole bunch of, like, movies are for video games cross generation. A lot of people from a lot of different age demos play video games, so I'm assuming it's massive.
Yeah, games is over $180 billion.
Wild.
Movies is just over 25 billion.
And books,
it's on the list, but it's
just for us old fogies.
Hold on. That's not fair. Terry, you're not even an avid book reader either.
I would say so.
The nonfiction stuff?
Oh, not technical nonfiction stuff? Yeah. I like nonfiction, but that's a different
the thing is it's not like Pat is playing video games at the expense of books. He's usually doing both. Pat, how many books are you reading a year right now?
I don't know. It's a lot.
More than 20.
More than 20, yes.
Definitely more than 20.
Go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just don't like sleeping. As a, like, I mean, I like it as a necessity piece, but I try to do as little of it as I possibly can.
And you're aging out of making more babies to keep you up all night.
Right. Right.
I just like the juxtaposition of a very learned professional man who also likes the taste of video game cartridges.
Yeah. No, I
Whoa,
don't.
whoa, 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 whoa! Gross mischaracterization.
Well, not by much.
You know,
I have also had a video game cartridge in my mouth. I just wanted that to be Pat's story.
I at work, I think I did at one point for our charity thing raffle off a come to one of the conference rooms and I'll bring a Raspberry Pi and we'll play Super Nintendo games for an hour. So that's I don't hide this. This is video games. Enjoyment of video games is I would say quite mainstream at this point.
Terry, what percentage of your wardrobe is band shirts or art shirts of some kind, or otherwise apparel that represents a hobby of yours? We're going to skip sports.
0.
You don't have any band shirts? I've seen you in a Clyde shirt, Terry. Come on now.
Well, I mean, that's my band, so I don't count that. That's like
So
leftover stuff.
if you produced Super Mario Brothers the game and you had a shirt left over from the run, you'd be like, I don't count that as a Mario Brothers shirt.
I wouldn't. It's a technicality. Would that stand in the court of law, Pat?
I did. Yeah, t-shirt law doesn't.
Pat's more of a dog law guy and less of a t-shirt law guy.
T-shirt law, all sorts of law.
Pat, how much of your wardrobe is video game related?
That Terry would never know that I'm
Never.
a video.
Not a million years.
So one thing that I like doing is most of the t-shirts that I have are ones that I've gotten made at a place that'll make t-shirts, or somebody as art design or something like that. But it's got to be one that is like a really deep cut and has no like sort of explanatory language, and so that like one person in like 400 will be like, yes, that shirt is for this 1996 Super Nintendo game that was only available in Japan. And you're like, yep, you got it, man. Like one of my best was there's just like, all right, so imagine a normal looking fox, like the animal, not a cartoon fox, but then you had the little eye, eye thing on, and a little scarf. And the guy at TSA was like, hey man, Star Fox, cool. And I thought, yep, that's right. That's good.
So you're perpetually quizzing strangers without knowing it.
The only people I wouldn't judge anybody for not getting it. It's only an opportunity to be pleasantly surprised by someone getting it, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So do you think, I always have to go here. Do you think that that the video games lasted for you because it's a connection to a prior time? Or do you think that your video games for video games' sake? It's just the thing itself. It has nothing to do with a connection to a different time period, a connection with, maybe family or experiences that you had that you remember.
That's a really great question. I would probably answer it as video games for video games' sake, in the sense that video games is one of the places that humans are continuing to innovate all the time, and it's available to you. It is art, absolutely, and new ideas and new different ways of doing things, and there'll be maybe every modern sort of role-playing game right now has as part of its DNA my favorite role-playing game from like 1996, right? And you can go through the whole thing and you'll see one little piece of it and you'll be like, oh yeah, that's where they got it, right? because everybody, it's a cultural thing. Everybody is playing the same things. Not everybody, but most people who are designing video games grew up loving video games and playing video games. And even if they're younger, going back and playing the classic video games and having respect for the past of where things came from. And it all feeds into just like newer and newer art. And, and it's the opportunity to see new art and to be really surprised by things. And I mean, Russ, like when you see there's a great positive in going back and playing video games that you love. It's like your favorite, it's your comfort thing that you want to play. And then sometimes it is surprising. I don't know till I'm playing a new video game if it's going to just click with me and it's going to become one of my favorite things ever, or I won't like it and I'll move on quickly. But there are games made this year that I haven't played yet that if I find it and it is like going to click with me, and it might be one of my favorite things ever, right? That's what I like about it.
I do it for wonder. I'm looking for a sense of wonder. Like I like imagination. I like some books, but a lot of times I find that novels feel contrived or they're not engaging enough. So horrible video game plots and lukewarm video game settings and so-so character development. I get the things that are a struggle for me from sort of okay to pretty good fiction. And now I have to do stuff in the game. So now the doing stuff and having some mechanic or having some, hand-eye coordination thing going on, that supplements the fact that the rest of the fiction is maybe not as good as Moby Dick, for example. But like Moby Dick, it's going to be Moby Dick. I'm going to read it from front to back. There's not a different way I'm going to do Moby Dick. I don't really have any influence over it. The Moby Dick of video games, which is the game Dishonored, the Moby Dick of video games, I wouldn't engage with it from end to end, and thinking about how the thing was made for you to go and find it, and the story is not in a beginning to end sense. It's in a scattered around, or you have to go dig, or you have to, like it's illuminated piecemeal. I like that as a medium for setting and characterization, storytelling, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm looking for is the same thing I would get out of a movie, where it's just an amazing scene, or it looks like a painting on the screen, or you really feel like the emotional performance that Leonardo DiCaprio has given. I don't know why I picked him, but that's what I'm looking for in a game. Pat, has Leonardo DiCaprio ever been in a video game?
I don't think so.
How confident are you in that answer?
I'll say I am. Oh man, I'll say I'm 90% sure Leonardo DiCaprio was never in a video game.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, you've both dipped deeply into this topic. So I want to ask, in music, because this is a space I know well, there's the sort of, hardline, contrarian, purist take on music as art that views most commercially popular music as crap, because if it's commercially popular, then they've sold out, it's not interesting, blah, blah, blah. And the more interesting it is, the more obscure it is. Does that same logic hold up in video games, where the most popular stuff is like just sort of, Kmart, Walmart, but there are more sort of avant-garde video games that are more interesting? Does it shake out the same way as it does in music?
So yes and no, which is to say, in video games, there's an extremely wide spectrum of video games, right? There's games that are made entirely by one person on no budget, and there are some of those games. Stardew Valley is one. It is one of my favorite games of all time, right? But then
this is a game that's in the top 25 best-selling games of all time, up there with Mario and Minecraft, which is the top-selling game of all time.
One person developed it?
No, not just one person developed it. One person coded it. The same person made all the art. The same person composed and performed all of the music. The same person distributed it across the first two platforms that it was on. And then eventually it got picked up, and he got a publisher who he only brought in to bring it to a different system. And the publisher was one guy.
and
So this
he's the sole person updating the game, and he also like the game is inspired by and this is what we were talking about before. The game Stardew Valley is inspired by this Super Nintendo, basic Nintendo franchise of games called Harvest Moon. That was this Japanese farming simulator, essentially. But it had like a big heart to it. It's fun. You go to the family farm. You have a dog. You're supposed to meet a girl, get married, or whatever. And so but that entire franchise and the company that made it, they've like gone off the rails. And the games they make, they're still making those games. They're just terrible. And so he was just like, oh, I want to make a game that's more like the old games, that'll be inspired by this. And he just made the whole thing himself. And people love it, and he's immensely wealthy because of it. But yeah, there's games like that, but then there's some games that I absolutely love that can only be made by a team of like 2,000 people working years with unlimited budget to do it. Um, so there's both sides, but the thing is, what's great at the heart of all of it is it has to click and has to be fun. I have played games developed by 500 people with an unlimited budget that are terrible and nobody likes. That happens multiple times a year. I played games by one person that are terrible because, it's not fun, right? Or something like that. It's so interesting and you don't always know what it'll be. Sometimes you can play a game and be like, I don't know why I like this game, but I like it, right? It's really interesting.
The to directly answer Terry's question about the artiness and the exclusivity and the stratification between the art games and the rest of the games, there there's still less than 50 years of history of video games at all. And it would have been really hard to argue that they were anything except intended as pure distraction entertainment until, I don't know, the 2000s maybe. But there wasn't really much of an attempt to make them be terribly artistic until a handful of games tried to do that in the 90s. And compared to music, there's just a much, 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 much smaller range of time for the battle lines to have been drawn. And the place where they're similar is there are bazillions of people making games. Not as many people as are out there making music. I mean, like, I could bang out a terrible album in a weekend of computer music and it would be lost forever the second I created it. Same thing for a game, but like I probably can't bang that game out in a weekend. And so the thing that both industries have been faced with in the last 15 years or so is this massive fractious splintering of, like, you got the top tier stuff that's like the pop stuff, and then you got everything else. And the pop stuff in video games is less polished and less guaranteed than the pop stuff was. A certain hit in the 90s, like, if you got a hit on your hands, you got a hit on your hands. The machinery behind the scenes of how you get hit music, like, that was polished, and it was a huge deal when Napster and file sharing kind of blew that up. That we're still at a point with video games where the publishing companies that make these things are taking something of a gamble as to whether the games that they really need to be a huge hit are actually successful or not. And so it's kind of wild to basically be taking that history of music and then the disruption from the 2000s and imagining, wait a second, where are we in video games on that timeline? Like, is that, what are we going to look back on? And is it going to be like, oh, this was like the beginning of rock and roll in the 60s, where one year there was no rock and roll. The next year, rock and roll existed. I don't know. I feel like I'm talking around your question, not answering it.
No. In fact, I'm 100% serious when I say this. That's one of the 2 or 3 best answers to anything you've ever given on this podcast. And I'm being 1,000,000% serious. So,
can I talk to you a little bit about music in video games, since you music?
Yep. I have one question for you first, and then I definitely want you to do that. Okay. Tell me why RBI Baseball 94 is the best sports video game ever.
Oh, because you have all the RBIs, 94 whole RBIs. No, RBI Baseball is great. That's the thing. That's what's great about video games, really. Anyone can tell me that X video game is their favorite video game, and I'll be like, I can see it. I mean, truly, I can almost see anything as being somebody's favorite game, because Russ and I have wildly divergent tastes in video games, but there's some we like in common. But then I have different tastes in video games than like almost everybody. That there's just it is like music in that way, which is to say there's no like taste is not to be disputed really. You know, I mean there's some levels where you're like, okay, well, I don't know about that. I don't know if we really need to play 9,000 hours of Candy Crush, but here we are. Right? The thing I think you would find interesting about music in video games is especially so it has the whole gamut, right? It has literally like full orchestra, musical. But some of the things that I like about the older games, like the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, and these sorts of things, the constraints in even the amount of space they had to make a song, how many bits for a song,
Yeah.
and how many notes they had, it caused them to be extremely creative, right? And so I had a thing, and my wife doesn't really play video games, and my son plays video games, but certainly not video games that old, really. And I was having a thing, and we were talking to them about music, and I was just playing songs from like old Super Nintendo video games. This sounds hilarious that they would let me even do this. And then my wife and son would like talk and describe what they thought was happening in the video game with that song. And they were like wildly successful at it. Like it would be like, they went into a cave and there's like something in there that is like magical in the cave, and then there's a bad guy around the corner. And I was like, yeah, that's actually right. You know, like just what they were picking up from like the mood and what was it gone. And there was a little like twinkle in the back there that was to indicate that there was kind of a hint of magic in this cave. And you really do get that where they're just like it's a visual art matched with an auditory art. And actually, if you want a great example of that, Radiohead made a video game that's just like a video game museum of Kid A, and you wander around their version of a museum to Kid A and interact with songs and video games that have to do with the songs and are all inspired by the songs.
Was that contemporary to Kid A's release, or is that a more recent thing?
Subsequent.
Wow.
See, I came into this segment full of skepticism and just, I thought we were going to be riding this out. There were all kinds of gold nuggets in this. This was meaningful.
Well, I mean, when you witness somebody else and their enthusiasm for their for their enthusiasm, their enthusiast hobby, like at a minimum, you got to appreciate the passion, and you got to pause and think, I'm still never going to play video games, but this guy sure loves them. And the human experience is what he's getting from that. And I'm going to get it from this over here. And somebody else is going to get it from hunting big game in Africa. But at the end of the day, we're all chasing the same stuff.
Hear, hear.
Well said.
I feel like I should end there.
Yep.
Take care, you guys.
Thanks, Pat.